What is the discipline of economics and why it needs an upgrade for the 21st century? My name's Kate Raworth and I trained as an economist 20 years ago, specialising in the economics of developing countries. Over the past 20 years, I've worked for the Overseas Development Institute in Zanzibar, for the United Nations Development Programme in New York, for Oxfam, and for the Environmental Change Institute now at Oxford University. And this journey has led me to explore development issues from many, many different angles, including poverty alleviation, economic growth, social justice, and environmental degradation. And it's brought me back to questioning the paradigm of economics that I was taught, and which continues to be taught in the vast majority of universities today. So this is my personal starting point for discussing the discipline of economics with you. We all know that economics matters. Its concepts and language pervade public life, on the television news, in the newspapers, and the state of the economy often makes headlines. The power of economic language is recognised well by politicians too, and so they often draw on it. When the UK's former Prime Minister Tony Blair wanted the UK, and indeed the world, to act on climate change, he commissioned a leading economist, Nicholas Stern, to write a review on the economics of climate change. And for the first time, the issue got the attention of the business community, and that helped bring climate change concerns into ministries of finance and planning. And this snapshot takes us into one of the most powerful meeting rooms in the world. It's a meeting of the finance ministers and bank governors of the G20 countries. And when they get together, their representation brings with it well over 80% of the world's financial resources. And if you wanted to be up to date with current affairs, you will probably read this magazine cover to cover. Of course, we're all economists in practice, because we're embedded in the global economy, as consumers purchasing goods and services, while knowing but rarely getting to see the long international supply chains of production that lie behind them, and with their complex social and environmental impacts. We're economists when we save or invest as pension holders or shareholders. As citizens and voters, we can call on our government to reshape the rules of the economy. As students, we are counted as the human capital of the future. As workers, we provide the labour force of the present. And as parents, we juggle caring for the retired workers of the last generation and raising the workers of the next generation with participating ourselves in today's workforce. And as one of many species living on this planet, we all depend on nature's resources as the foundation of all economic wealth that we generate. So what exactly could you expect to find if you wandered into a department of economics or opened up a university economics textbook? Let's start by going back to the roots, to the very first edition of The Economist, which was published in the 3rd century BC and was written by the Greek Xenophon. Xenophon coined the term out of ekos, meaning household, and nomos, meaning rule or custom. So economics originally meant something like household management. And Xenophon's treatise aimed to document the skills and attributes of a good household manager. But in his meaning, economics was literally management at the level of the household. To get beyond that, we need to jump forward around 2,000 years to when James Stewart, a Scottish lawyer and landowner, wrote the first ever treatise on the economics of managing a nation or a state, and he named the subject political economy. As he wrote, economy in general is the art of providing for all the wants of a family. So the science of political economy seeks to secure a certain fund of subsistence for all the inhabitants, to obviate every circumstance which may render it precarious, to provide everything necessary for supplying the wants of the society, and to employ the inhabitants in such manner as naturally to create reciprocal relations and dependencies between them, so as to supply one another with reciprocal wants. I think this is a really interesting quote because it touches on so many issues that have shaped the later development of economics. First, you can see highlighted in blue, Stewart says that household economics is an art, but he claims that political economy is a science. He was no doubt inspired in his time by Enlightenment thinking and the scientific revolution, and was seeking to establish this discipline as a science alongside the natural sciences, which had so recently made huge developments. He also defined political economy in terms of what it seeks to do. So he was defining it in relation to a series of goals. The goals picked out are there in green: to secure a fund of subsistence for all of the inhabitants, to ensure that it is not precarious, to meet the wants of a society, to employ people. There's a focus on jobs there right from the very start. and to create reciprocal relations and dependencies, in essence to create a self-sustaining economic community. So in this very first definition of political economy, Stewart had already touched on two major strands in defining the discipline of economics. First, its methodological status and analytical approach, and second, its focus or object of study. And we'll briefly explore both of these. 10 years after Stewart, Adam Smith famously published The Wealth of Nations, and following him there was a succession of founding fathers of economics, among them John Stuart Mill, Léon Walras, William Stanley Jevons and Karl Marx, all the way through to John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s. In terms of shaping the methodology of mainstream economic thought, two of these men played a critical role. The Frenchman, Walras, and the Brit, Jevons, had both observed the success of Newton's laws of motion and equilibrium. You could say they had physics envy, and so they were keen to demonstrate that economics could be an equally rigorous science. As Walras said to himself, he sought to create a science of economic forces analogous to the science of astronomical forces, while Jevons insisted that all branches and divisions of economic science must be pervaded by certain general principles. And so they constructed economic theories that worked as a direct analogy to Newton's mechanical laws, describing economic factors as forces and presenting market interactions as an equilibrium between supply and demand. The implications of this analogy, which many would agree was not a wise move, still live on in the discipline of economics today, and we'll return to this later. But what of the second issue in defining economics that was raised by Stewart, the focus or object of economic study? Open an economics textbook today, and you're likely to find a definition of economics something like one of these, but they actually differ subtly from one another. Some define it as a study of human behaviour. Others say it's about the choices that individuals and others make. Others still say it's a study of how human beings coordinate their wants and desires. Others would say it's about how society manages its scarce resources. What's common to all of these is that none of them propose goals for the economy, as Stewart did. Instead, they focus on understanding how processes work. And in making this shift from specifying goals for the economy to understanding how the economy works, economists have often claimed that their discipline is therefore now value-free, calling it positive rather than normative economics. Given so many possible definitions of exactly what the study of economics is, it's hardly surprising that the economist Jacob Weiner suggested simply that economics is what economists do. Well, if that's the case, then we should care very much indeed who the economists are, and particularly how they have perceived the world. It's not hard to spot that all the founding fathers of today's mainstream economics were well-off white European men, many of them writing during the UK's and then Europe's Industrial Revolution. So we should be asking ourselves how their personal lives, their politics, their historical contexts may have shaped their views of the economic world, both in terms of the methods that they sought to use and the aims that they proposed for economics. Each of us has a worldview, that is a framework of ideas and beliefs through which we as individuals and societies interpret the world. And that worldview is going to shape how we conceive of everything, including the discipline of economics. As the economist Schumacher said in the 1960s, what matters is the toolbox of ideas with which, by which, through which, we experience and interpret the world. And the good news for that toolbox is that a far wider range of people today call themselves economists or influence the discipline of economics from outside it. And this diversity of worldviews has helped to start generating a much broader conception of what economics should be about and how it should be done. In the next section, I'll give an example of just how much of an important difference to economic analysis that broader conception can make.